in the Mediterranean world. So Nubians were all over the Mediterranean world, fighting the battles with the Egyptians side by side, navigating all over the place looking for precious metals for weapons, to fight the Hittites, the Assyrians, all those people from the north who were coming down. And so the helmets that were being worn are very much like the helmets that were being worn by the Nubians. As you can see, the Pharaoh Taharka with the war helmet here. As again, Van Woutenau, from his book Unexpected Faces in America. In fact, Compton College years ago, Brother Ranuka Rashidi and others who were working there had Van Woutenau come to Compton College. I don't know, this is quite a few years ago. And he was able to point out a number of these particular coincidences, the so-called coincidences, which is obviously that there's a connection here of the war helmet and the facial features here. Only in Africa, again, can you anticipate this type of facial expression, the prognathous jaw, the thick lips, the broad nose. These signs and symbols are all over Africa, but these are things that we're just supposed to discard and not consider. The war helmet, again, consistently. I mean, this one here is just, it's paralyzing. And to look at the face, it's fierce. They're no nonsense type people. And again, obviously, what Van Sertima has brought to our attention, the braids in conjunction with the features. I mean, who else is cornrowing? Bo Derek wasn't around at this time. And I took a picture of my little girl's back of her head just to drive home the point. You know, these are cultural characteristics of these people. These features are characteristics of our people. They go hand in hand. To find this head in America, pre-Columbian, at the heart of the Olmec civilization, is a testimonial to who these foreign people were. You have to consider this evidence. In this particular site, Taltielco, they found this. Look at the afro on this face, on this head. Look at the afro. The peppercorn hair, as they call it. The lips, the nose. Again, who else in the world has this type of feature? Turn around and look at each other. Taltielco is one of the very places that Andrus Warsinski did analysis of skeletons here in that particular site. And so in conjunction with this art, he found African skeletons that date back to Olmec times. Skeletons. Cranioscopically taking measurements of the skulls here at Taltielco, the same place you found that art, the art with the African face, they found the African skeletons there. And in 1974, at a conference in Mexico, he announced the discovery, and he wrote, it appeared that some of the skulls from Taltielco, Sierra de las Masas, and Monte Alban, all pre-classic sites in Mexico, show to a different degree a clear prevalence of the total Negroid pattern that has been evidenced by the use of two methods: multivariate distance analysis of average characteristics of individual fractions distinguished cranioscopically, B, analysis of frequency distributions of mean index of the position between combinations of racial varieties. Dr. Ben, where are you? Okay, putting it in the simplest terms. Measured the cranium, found that the cranium of the skulls found in this particular tomb was identical to that of not the Negrito types in Southeast Asia, but of the continental African types. And the variations, as far as the variations are concerned, in many cases, in many instances, he was able to find the African skeleton laying next to the Native American skeleton, a female in most cases, and you can see clearly and could differentiate clearly between the skull of the African and that of the Native American. So this is all he is saying. But he was at a conference, so he had to use that term. So we here, so we don't have to use those terms today. And so it was brought to my attention here at Uxmal that this particular pyramid was built by dwarfs. 7 dwarfs. I said, well, dwarfs? Now the Mayans were already small people, but they're writing about people who were smaller than themselves. So I said, well, let me just, before I explode, let me just check this thing out further. And then, sure enough, you found that the dwarf, as the Mayans would consult the dwarf was in power. He was in control of nature. As you see him holding the bird, the symbol of the spirit in his hand. He was the guardian of the spirit world, just like that in ancient Kemet, the Twa. So here we are, we got the concept of the Twa, or the pygmies, in a land where there are no Twas and no pygmies. is important. We move on, we can see here that in Kemet you can see the Pharaoh, as the Pharaoh went to the other world, he assumed the position of best Horus, the Twa, the pygmy, and he did the dance of God before Osiris, and with the spirit of the Twa he could trample on the animals. He could hold all the animals that we were afraid of, that we feared, the scorpions, the serpents, the snakes, the lions, all these animals associated with our fears, he was in control over now because he was under the spirit and guidance of the Twa, who were the dancers of the god Osiris. So here you can see this concept of controlling nature by the dwarf or the Twa or the pygmy was consistent here in America as well as in Africa. Moving on, you can see again they call the Twa the dancers of God because they live in the midst of the forest, in the midst of all the things that we fear. And they show him standing on top of the lotus flower, on top of the papyrus flower, symbolizing his control and his association with nature itself. The inundations that come down from the interior of Africa, from the forest regions of Africa, from the sources of the Nile River, is where these people do this dance. This is important. And so here you can see the Mayan. Look at him. Clearly distinct. Look at the features of the Mayan. Look at the nose of the Mayan as he consults the little Twa who is seated in the plant. He is at one with this particular plant. Going back to the Twa here, standing on the lotus flower in Kemet, taking on the same attributes that you see here in America. Now look at the nose and the lips on the Twa. The artist clearly, I'm an artist, I do sculpture. He clearly differentiated the features of the Twa from that of the Mayan. Can you see that? Yes. If you can't, let's take a closer look. Yes. Can you see it? Yes. Now look at this codex. Here's a codex much like the papyrus of Hunefer that is showing the races of men as understood by the Mayans. This is important because these are the types that were here in America at this time. They all showed them the same complexion but variations in their features. One has the hook nose much like the Mayan that you just saw. But then when you came to the foreigner, and look, he's tied and bound. He's a prisoner. And he's black. And look at his lips. So they're clearly differentiating this type, which is a black, who is being held captive and prisoner, and they've emphasized his lips, showing you clearly they understood that this was a foreigner, a different complexion, right there in their land. And in their art, even this particular piece, as they sculpted this piece, they actually put black tar on it. My mind could walk through this door. You can go just at random, grab anybody out there and bring them in here, and they'll say, yeah, there's some strong black stuff going on in this building. Go grab some of the white folks walking around the corner and come over and see if, ask them, tell them that this is from Ghana and see if they can tell the difference. So just like the Twa in the interior of Africa, the dancers of God, those who played the music for Osiris, the features of the Twa are the features of the Twa that you find here in America. Shown so many years ago, playing the harp, playing the music, doing the dance of God. In fact, they were so highly venerated that the Egyptians put them on the houses called Mamisi, which is the birth house of the gods. The place where the gods are born. Every religious site in Kemet had a Mamisi, whether it was at Dendera, whether it was at Philae, at Abydos. Every site had a Mamisi, which represented the place where the gods were born. And the place that the gods were born, as we have stated from the beginning, was the interior of Africa, the place where the river was born, the place where the soul returns back. And so it was these little Twa, these pygmies, who did the dance for Osiris in the interior, in the forest region. And then in the Yucatan Peninsula, they told me that the Twa there, the dwarfs, were the guardians of the forest, the guardians of the soul. So when you see Disneyland sticking up Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, you know where they're copying this stuff from here, right off the Mamisi houses here. See, all these traditions go into Europe by way of Africa. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. The pot of gold on the other side of the rainbow where the leprechauns is. The pot of gold is in Nubia, is in Ethiopia where the gold is. This is where the rainbow is. So these are St. Patrick who drove out the snakes. There are many books that Ritchie, Ancient and Modern Britons, J. Rogers, many of his works, he has cited these things. The traditions that come out of Africa that permeate throughout Europe. And so you find the same traditions permeating throughout the Americas, brought in at a time when the Africans were in conflict with foreigners, at a time that they were navigating, and at a time that the pyramid shows up in America, and you can't account for pyramids in any other place but in Africa. So you can see Bess Horus again, as Churchward calls it, the first god anthropomorphically depicted is the primitive human form of Horus in the form of a Twa here. Bess Horus, the elder Horus, holding in his hand the symbol of the lotus flower, symbol of water, symbol of the great river, symbol of birth. The birthing house again is associated with the Twa. And so you find in Mexico, even when you find that a dwarf has been born naturally in Mexico, he becomes associated with these guardians of the forest. And you can see him holding in his hand a cactus plant. Again, cactus, like the lotus flower, when you're in the desert, it represents what? Water. Again, the same kinds of symbology associated. Holding the lotus flower or holding the cactus, again in association with birth, in association with waters. All these parallels are too close. At what point does possibility become probability? As we read about this, in many ancient and surviving Indian cultures, dwarfs are considered miraculous beings of the earth and mountains, capable of transforming themselves from human into other forms, including sacred plants. In Oaxaca, where divine mushrooms are still used in rituals, they often appear as little men or dwarfs bearing both male and female characteristics. This particular piece dates back to 100 BC. Now that's important because when you look at, read Jomo Kenyatta's Facing Mount Kenya. When the Maasai and the Kikuyu came down from the mountain area to settle in the plains, the Twa were living there, which they call a Goomba, and these people, they said they were miraculous because they were able to disappear into the earth. So this characteristic of being the people of the earth and people of vegetation and resource, this was universal throughout Africa. And so again, you find it right here in America, in a place that there were no pygmies. As Gerald Massey writes in Ancient Egypt, Out of the World, talking about Ptah and his workers, his pygmy workers, hollowed out the underworld. Amenta was based upon the mind. It was a secret earth in which the treasures were concealed. So again, the Twa are always associated with the underworld, with hollowing out tunnels and being able to disappear. You know, in fact, I wish we had more time. I can't even tell you the story, but as we go on, we can see that the place that they lived in this particular forest was at the interior of Africa, at the dead center portion of Africa. In fact, on the equator, which they call Aker. Aker is where we get the word ek, which means equator or equal. And so this place, Osiris could sit here at Ruwenzori, Kilimanjaro, the mountains of the moon as they call it, and peer over into the forest and watch the Twa do the dance of God. The pharaohs are in boats now, coming down the Nile in the boat. Their souls journeying back to come to rest in the land of reeds, the land of rushes, which is a great Sud region filled with papyrus plants and thickets. It is this Sud area that ships the papyrus and lotus to Egypt to give Egypt life every year. So the whole religion is a process that takes place in nature. They saw the inundation process. The Egyptians said the Nile River came from heaven. It's the clouds. You can see Kilimanjaro, Mount Kenya, towering above the clouds. The clouds are pouring water from heaven into the valley here, creating the large inundation, sending the alluvium and topsoil 4,100 miles from Egypt and 3,700 miles from Ethiopia, bringing life to Egypt. The whole process of the religion is here, and all of a sudden you got some people in Mexico talking about some guardians of the forest, some little people, and they don't even exist over there. And then they tell you that these people came who founded their civilization from across the waters. So look at the geological processes that are responsible for the stories that you have. In the interior of Africa, I said that this black earth and silt came from the mountains, the volcanoes in the interior of Africa. They called this black burning rock Kim, and they showed it as a symbol, burning. It was in this area that the volcanoes would go off and create, you know, volcanoes create the richest soil in the world. Go to any island that's created by a volcano, you find all kinds of wildlife, vegetation, because it's the richest soil in the world. So this soil is created, and when the rain comes and washes this alluvium down to Egypt, and you can see clearly Egypt was a barren land, and it gives life. So Ta Tenen, the raised land, the land of the ancestors, Ta Netherland, was a land where the soil was being shipped by the gods as a blessing to the Egyptians. I can't emphasize that enough, because we're going to come home to a point here. You can see here again the concept, the principle of the magma from the interior, from the underworld. You can see the clouds. As the clouds surround the mountain, this is where Osiris' throne was, where he could sit as the judge of the underworld. He's sitting in heaven, but yet he's on earth. They show you this in the drawings. He's on earth, but he's in heaven. He's at the place where the Nile is born, the place where the gods are born. This is the place where the souls have to tread on fire if they're found to be unjust. This is the legendary lake of fire that comes to us in Scripture and Bible. This is the place of the judgment scene. The Lake Victoria, which they call it, on Mwanza, this is the legendary lake of fire that they talked about. As you can see here, Atam, as they told the story, the primeval hill Ptah rose up, and Atam, fire rose and set on the hill, and the process of creation came about. Look at the islands in the South Pacific. Fire is begetting life. The raised land. So pyramid, you can find in the etymology of words, pyra means fire. Mid is the mound. The mound of fire is what the Greeks call the pyramid. Even though the Egyptians didn't call it that, it shows you that the Greeks understood the references that the Egyptians made to those structures. The mound of fire, the pyramid. And so in Mexico City, this was in 1986. Walking through here, one of the guys said that this temple here was designed after the volcano in the background. You can see the volcano in the background. So the pyramids in Mexico took on the same meaning that they had in Kemet, the house of fire, the mound of fire. And it was in the center of the world that Osiris sat on his throne in the judgment of the dead. And it was in the center of this particular place that they developed this called Teotihuacan, which literally means the place or the house where the gods are born. Go read it. Any book on Mexico will tell you that Teotihuacan means the house where the gods are born. And not far from that was a lake at Tenochtitlan in which the Aztecs founded their ceremonial center with the same concepts behind the buildings there. The equinoctial lion symbolizing the equator, equinoctial symbols identical in meaning with similar Mayan glyphs in Yucatan. The two lions represent Shu and Tefnut, guardians of the stability of the rising equinoctial sun. Here you can see right here in Uxmal in the governor's palace. Took a picture of this. You can see the lions back to back, or the jaguars. They had no zoo types called lions. So they used the jaguar, the great cats. Again, they put an emphasis on cats like the so-called societies, cults, as the Europeans call them in West Africa, the jaguar societies, the lion societies. All of a sudden you find the same emphasis on the large cats in Mexico. The symbol of Akar, the symbol of the equinoctial rising sun, the symbol of the equator, the symbol of the place where the gods are born. Palenque. Again, the cats, nobody had more cats than we did throughout Africa. Cats were venerated, leopards and lions all over the continent. The jaguar became the symbol of power here in Mexico, as the lion was the symbol of power in Kemet. We begin to close out there. Priests began to adorn themselves in the regalia that you would expect to see in Kemet. As you see the symbol of the serpent, not only on the shield behind him, but the uraeus above his head, and wearing the skin of the jaguar. Looks like a scene right out of the tomb of King Tutankhamun, as he wears the skin of the leopard with the uraeus on his helmet here. Again, coming from the interior of Africa, the cultural unity of Africa's Diop has emphasized time and time again. All we need to do is read his books. The crooks and the flail, the ostrich feathers, the leopard skin. This is in Uganda, the heart of Africa. This is where this stuff is coming from. But they worshipped us as gods. They didn't make fun of us as priests. And when they showed the sun, they showed the sun. Deformation of the head. Something that's done all over West Africa. Well, made a mistake here, but you can get the point. In fact, look at the earring here and go back and look at the ear here. It's almost identical. You can see the deformation that took place. They do this at birth. When the child is born, they fasten sticks and they tie it in some manner so that they can create the shape when the skull is still soft. So you can see it's done all over Africa, particularly in West Africa. Cultural characteristics coming across to America. When you look at something like this, then you understand how something like this gets to America pre-Columbian. Again, the artists are representing things that they understood, things that they could differentiate from themselves. You can see much of it still here even to this day as you go into the Amazon and you find these things being done that are being done nowhere else but in Africa. So this is our final slide. And as I opened up, I encouraged many of you brothers and sisters, particularly the younger ones, to be persistent and persevere to search for truth. And none of us really stand on our own. All of us learn from others. This was a conference I attended in 1987. And I just wanted to share a little something with you. Because over the years I have sat in the audience for years and years and years at Compton College, at various universities around not only around the city but around the country as well. And at times I can recall when people like LeGrand Clegg and Ronoko Rashidi and others would be speaking, there would maybe be 5 people in there. Or look, Brother Majid, or Sister Wally knows about that. She's been around here, doing the same thing, and nobody would come out. But they continued to do their work. And now, these people are pretty much known as who's who. There are other unsung heroes, people that you don't even know about, like Cheka Abubakari, brothers like that, and Brother Asar Jabal, people you've never heard of. But these are people that contributed to my growth, contributed to my development. And so when you see Brother Mathu speaking or offering some information to someone else, it's not in and of myself that I come, but it's because of others who have cared enough, even when there were only 4 or 5 people that came out, to go ahead and go through with it. That's why when I met Brother Femi, I told him at his house that night, the brother told you that we sat down and we went through my slides. The brother said, well, brother, I had invited a few other people here, and it's just my wife and myself. And at the time was an engineer that I worked with in his architectural office, a brother by the name of Melnor Sinioko from Guinea. And so he was there that night, and so he said, well, brother, what I can do is I can have you back to do the lecture. And I said, no, brother, we're going to go through these slides tonight. I said, I don't care if it was just you and me, or it was just me. In fact, if you can get a pack of dogs and sit down and listen, I'll lecture to them. But this is the approach that we have to take when we're dealing with the truth, because every time that you go over material, it makes you that much better for the next. And so